Joe is a man with a passion for music, but despite this, he has never been able to support himself by playing concerts. To make some money, Joe works as a part-time teacher in a public school, but since his students are all teenagers, none of them are really getting into music, which makes him even more frustrated with his life. One day while teaching one more of his classes, Joe is called by the principal, who tells him that from now on he will be hired to work full-time on a contract, but instead of being happy, this makes Joe very thoughtful. After presenting all the classes, Joe goes to his mother's sewing store to tell her about the promotion, but instead of asking what he wants to do, Libba pressures her son to take the job and give up his dream with concerts, forcing Joe to promise that he will do it. But just as he gives his answer, Curly, a former student of Joe's, calls to tell him that he is working in the band of Dorothea Williams, one of the greatest jazz singers in the entire country. Curly also says that the group's pianist has quit, so they need a new replacement. Extremely excited about the opportunity, Joe rushes to the theater to take the test, but upon realizing that he is only a high school teacher, Dorothea belittles him and says she doesn't want to waste her time. Even after this, Joe goes to the piano and the test begins, but since Dorothea doesn't say which song it is to play, Joe starts to observe the notes that the girl with the cello is making and replicates the chords on the piano. Realizing that Joe was able to interpret the song, Dorothea lets him do a solo to demonstrate his skills, but while playing, Joe gives himself completely to the music, shutting off from the outside world for a few seconds. When Joe comes to his senses, Dorothea says it was not bad at all and asks him to put on his best suit and come back to rehearsal at 7 o'clock at night. Excited, Joe leaves the theater extremely happy and celebrates his achievement while walking home. Because of his excitement, he gets distracted and doesn't see an open manhole in the middle of the street, falling all the way down the hole. Sometime later, Joe regains consciousness and realizes that he is on a treadmill that leads straight to a large light source. In fear, Joe runs in the opposite direction, where he meets other people who explain that they are no longer alive, and that by going into the light, they will go to the great beyond. In a state of denial, Joe says he can't miss Dorothea's concert and starts walking in the other direction, but as he realizes that the approaching souls are pulled by the light, he starts running completely panicked in the middle of the crowd. As there are many souls on the treadmill, Joe climbs up on the spirits and runs around stepping on their heads, but in desperation, he decides to jump off the treadmill, crossing a protective barrier and falling through several dimensions until he reaches a clearing of blue grass. When he gets up, Joe sees that he is surrounded by thousands of other souls and tries to hide, but is soon met by little spirits who run to play with him. As soon as he notices the presence of a stranger, the being responsible for caring for the little souls appears before Joe and explains that they are in the Great Before, the area where unborn spirits are prepared for human life. Still quite confused, Joe asks for the name of the spirit, who says that everyone responsible for the Great Before is called Jerry. As he is in the world of souls, Joe asks if he has really lost his life, and Jerry replies that he hasn't yet. For although his spirit is already there, his body is still in a waiting mode. In order to show Joe around, Jerry transforms himself into a sort of mount and begins to introduce him to the pavilions, as well as the portal that leads to Earth. As soon as he sees the portal, Joe gets off his mount and runs straight into the hole to throw himself in with the other souls, but for some reason, every time he is approaching the Earth, he is pulled back into the Great Before. Confused, Joe stands in front of the portal until he is met by another Jerry, who, believing him to be a soul mentor, takes him to a line and asks him to get a badge. Since he doesn't know what he's talking about, Joe refuses to get in line and says he needs to leave. However, when Jerry shows that the only place he can go is to the Great Beyond, Joe changes his mind, grabs some random person's badge and heads off to mentor training. At that moment, the soul counter who stands in the passage to the Great Beyond realizes that she has a missing soul and goes to the Great Before Jerry to report what has happened. Determined to solve the problem, the counter goes to the register room and starts checking all the millions of sheets one by one, willing to stop only when she finds out who is missing. In the mentor class, the instructor explains that all the souls that are in the Great Before will one day go to Earth, but for this, they need to form their personality and find out what they like. After the Great Before souls have formed their tastes, there is a gap left to fill, which is each one's spark. And this is exactly where mentors must act, helping spirits to discover their spark. As the lecture ends, Jerry appears and says it's time to bring the mentors and soul partners together, and starts calling for Dr. Borgenson. Since it is not his name, Joe just stands there clapping, until he realizes that the badge he stole is from this doctor and that he needs to go on stage to maintain his cover. To be Joe's soul partner, Jerry calls number 22 to the stage, a very old spirit who has had mentors such as Muhammad Ali, Marie Antoinette, and Nicolaus Copernicus, but despite this, has never been able to find his spark and therefore refuses to go to Earth. With both introduced, Jerry drops the 22 in Joe's face and opens the portal to the Hall of U dimension, a mysterious place that shows the most important moments of the mentor's life. In this place, 22 asks Joe to give up and go to the great beyond, but since he needs the badge that is on her chest, he reveals that he is not Dr. Borgenson and shows the highlights of his life. But unlike other people, all the highlights of Joe's life are failures, both in his music career and in his personal life. While walking through his memories, Joe finds his unconscious body on a hospital gurney and asks for the badge of the 22 so he can return to Earth, but she explains that no matter what she tries, the badge will remain attached to her soul until it becomes a pass. Knowing that she does not want to be born, Joe proposes to help 22 turn the badge into a pass. With that done, she must deliver the object so he can return to Earth, which makes her a free spirit that can stay in the world of souls forever. To try to discover 22's spark, Joe decides to take her to the Hall of Everything, a place that, as the name implies, has all the things in the world for great before souls to experience and discover their inspirations. In this place, Joe tries to show 22 the pleasures of food, but since they are in the spirit world, they lack touch, smell, and taste, therefore, they are not able to feel anything physical. After this first failure, Joe takes the 22 into various activities, such as putting out fires, painting pictures, and doing artistic gymnastics, but none of it works out and they leave the room of everything completely disappointed. Outside, a Jerry shows up to say that Joe's time is up and it's time for him to go to the great beyond, but knowing that if that happens another mentor will come to try to get her to go to Earth, 22 begs Jerry to give them both more time. At her request, Jerry leaves while 22 guides Joe to a secret passage that leads to a place where people who are still alive can access it. On the other side, 22 explains that this is the place where people go when they are on hallucinogenic or extremely inspired, and Joe realizes that this is the place where he ended up when he was doing the test with Dorothea. While observing the surrounding landscape, Joe sees some creatures wandering in the desert until one of them notices their presence and starts chasing them. With nowhere to run, the two are trapped against a rock until suddenly, a giant ship appears and traps the creature with some sort of containment net. After stopping the boat, Captain Moonwind disembarks, greets 22, and introduces himself to Joe. It is revealed that 22 has come to this place only to find this being. With the introductions made, Moonwind asks his crew to release the lost soul and return it home. To do this, the crew members begin to perform a ritual that takes away all the creature's anxiety and obsession, causing it to become an ordinary soul again. With that done, one of the crew takes the Moonwind staff and draws a circle on the ground, opening a portal that allows the spirit to return to its body. Excited by what he sees, Joe takes the staff and draws a circle in the earth, but instead of opening a portal to his body, it opens a passage to the great beyond. Now Joe's soul is becoming increasingly disconnected from his body. To try to re-establish the connection between the soul and the body, Moonwind draws a large circle on the ground and asks Joe to focus on his own body until he locates it, revealing that he is on a hospital gurney. As soon as he sees the scene, Joe tries desperately to jump back into his body, but in the midst of the confusion he ends up dropping 22 along with him into the human world. This was a terrible mistake, for when they arrive on Earth, 22 possesses his body while Joe invades the body of the hospital's pet cat. When the doctors enter the room, Joe tries to tell the staff what has happened, but since he is in the body of a cat, the only thing they can hear is the cat meowing. Since 22 is the only one who can communicate with humans, Joe begins to dictate what she should say, but upon hearing the story about the School of Souls incorporeal exchange, the doctors think it is a side effect of the medications and put him under observation. With 10 minutes left before the doctors take the cat away, Joe proposes to escape from the hospital and find the human version of the Moonwind, but since she has never controlled a body before, 22 struggles a lot before she can really walk. Even though Joe and 22 can't walk properly, they go into stealth mode and manage to get out of the hospital unnoticed, but when they arrive outside, her souls freeze completely as she sees all the noise and chaos of New York City. Realizing that she has paralyzed, Joe tries to get her attention to make her move, but the man ends up scratching 22 who, feeling pain for the first time, runs in complete panic. Desperate, Joe begins to search for the soul until he finds her sitting in an alley quite frightened. To calm her down, Joe takes a slice of pizza from a store and hands it to 22, who is delighted to smell and taste the pizza for the first time. Now with their stomachs full, 22 calms down and they continue on their mission to find Moonwind, which doesn't take long to happen. As soon as they find the man, 22 runs up to him and starts swinging him around, bringing him out of his astral journey and back to Earth. When he realizes that Joe and 22 are there, the Moonwind says that in order to exchange bodies, they need to wait until a new hole between the Earth and the astral plane opens up, which will only happen at 6:30. With nothing to do until that time, Joe and 22 try to order a taxi home, but as they are getting into the vehicle, they end up being seen by Dorothea. At home, Joe starts planning what to do, and gets a call from Curly, who says that after seeing him in hospital clothes in the middle of the street, Dorothea has given up on hiring him and called someone else to play. But to comfort him, Curly tells him to put on his best suit and go to the theater so that he will try to convince her to change her mind. Happy that he still has a chance, Joe tells 22 to put on his suit, but at that moment, Connie, a student of Joe's, shows up at the door to tell him that she is giving up music because it is a waste of time. Agreeing with the girl, 22 locks Joe inside the apartment and stands outside encouraging Connie to give up both music and school, but upon seeing the girl's skills with the trombone, 22 is moved and advises her to keep going after her dream. Finding it strange what she felt when he saw Connie playing, 22 decides to give human life a chance and have new experiences, such as taking a hot bath and brushing her teeth. With her soul satisfied, Joe asks her to put on his best suit and tries to cut her hair, but since he is in a cat's body, he ends up messing up and putting a hole in her hair. Knowing that he cannot perform with this mess in his head, Joe takes 22 to the barber who manages to give her a new look, perfect for the big performance. But while 22 is getting her hair cut, the counter finally finds Joe's file and realizes that his soul has come back to Earth. To solve this problem, she goes to the hospital and starts tracking them down until she finds Joe and 22 leaving the barbershop. But while trying to capture them, the thing ends up taking the soul of an innocent person, leaving him completely traumatized. Unaware that the counter is behind them, Joe and 22 walk calmly to the place they have arranged to meet the moon wind, but halfway there, 22 bends down to pick up an object and ends up tearing Joe's pants. With no other options, the man decides to take her to his mother's sewing store to have the pants mended, but knowing that she will not be happy to know that she will use the clothes to perform a concert, he asks her to lie. But as soon as they arrive at the sewing store, everyone already knows about the presentation with Dorothea, including his mother. Upon entering her office, 22 shows her the rip and asks if Libba can fix it, but she refuses to help and fights with her son for throwing away the opportunity of a steady job. Upset, Joe complains that his mother never supported him and calls 22 to leave, but thinking it is to repeat the phrase, she ends up telling everything he said. Finally understanding how her son feels, Libba regrets not having supported him and decides to give her late husband's favorite suit to Joe. After some adjustments to his father's suit, Joe is finally ready for the concert and walks to the theater to meet Moon Wind, but while they wait, 22 sees a father playing with his daughter and begins to reflect on her experiences on Earth, making her realize that she has changed her mind and now wants to live among humans. At 6:30 p.m. sharp, the Moon Wind arrives in front of the theater and begins to prepare for the ritual, but afraid of going back to the school of life and never being able to experience these sensations again, the 22 refuses to leave Joe's body and begins to run away. Wanting his body back, Joe starts chasing her to the subway, but the counter finally finds them and takes advantage of an empty stretch of the station to open a portal to the world of souls. In the other plane, the counter separates the duo's souls from their bodies and brings them back to the Great Before, where Joe and 22 start a big fight, but the Jerrys interrupt the two when they realize that the soul has finally managed to turn her badge into a pass, meaning she has finally found her spark. Confused, 22 starts to wonder what the spark is, until Joe shouts in a totally rude way saying that she only got the pass because she was living his life as an intruder. Realizing the level the discussion is reaching, Jerry interrupts the two and asks Joe to take 22 to the portal to Earth. When she reaches the edge of the portal, 22 is extremely upset by what Joe said and throws the pass at his head, disappearing into the midst of the souls. Instead of going after her, Joe goes to a Jerry to ask what her spark was, but in response, he explains that we don't need purpose or reasons to exist, and that the spark is just wanting to be alive. Still not understanding what he meant, Joe takes the pass and jumps through the portal, returning to his body that was lying in the middle of the station. Upon regaining consciousness, Joe rushes to the theater, breaks into Dorothea's dressing room, and manages to convince her to give him a chance. With his problem solved, Joe goes on stage and performs with the band, winning over the audience and making official his position as Dorothea's new pianist. After the concert, Joe begins to feel empty and asks Dorothea what comes next, but she replies by saying just more performances, one day after another. Disappointed that his dream has come true and yet nothing has changed in his life, Joe begins to reflect on his entire journey and realizes that none of it was worth it, but as he remembers what Jerry said about the spark, he realizes that 22 really wanted to be alive. As a way of making amends for his mistakes, Joe goes home and starts playing the piano in a very inspired way, causing him to go to the astral plane. In the spirit world, Joe meets with Moon Wind and tells him that he needs to find 22, but he tells him that she has become a lost soul. Determined to save her, Joe asks the help of Moonwind so that together they can bring her back. Moonwind then starts sailing until he finds the spirit of the 22 and asks Joe to trap it with the net, but as soon as it is captured, the lost soul begins to dig down until it sinks the ship, causing Moonwind to return to Earth. When she returns to the surface, 22 starts running around in desperation until she feels trapped and decides to flee to the Great Before. Seeing a lost soul loose in the Great Before, the Counter tries to make her stop but is easily immobilized by 22. In fear, the soul continues running wildly around the place while hurling various spirits at Joe, but she eventually gets distracted and is cornered by the Jerrys at the portal to Earth. Now that the 22 finally stopped, Joe takes the opportunity to try to talk to her and give her the pass back, but he ends up getting too close and getting eaten up. Inside the lost soul, Joe sees all the times that 22 was humiliated by her mentors and discovers that she never discovered her spark precisely because of the anxiety she felt. Completely sorry for everything he said, the man finally manages to get around all the bad feelings and reaches 22 in the center of the storm, freeing his friend from all the bad feelings. Now that the soul has finally returned to consciousness, Joe returns the pass and accompanies her as she leaps through the portal. When the 22 finally falls into the world of the living, Joe is pulled back and teleported to the treadmill of the great beyond, but just as he is ready to turn himself in, one of the Jerrys shows up to thank him for what Joe has done and tells him that they have decided to give him another chance to live. Back in his body, Joe learns his lesson and starts to enjoy every second of his life.